Tibet is encompassed by some of the world's highest mountains and is located between India and China. Buddhism has exerted a particularly strong influence on the Tibetan culture since its introduction in the 7th century. Tibetans practice many funeral rituals, including cremation, water burial, internment, and cliff and tree burial. But the most widespread way for commoners in Tibet of dealing with the dead is the sky burial. Sky burial is simply the disposition of a corpse to be devoured by vultures. After death, the corpse enjoys a 3 to 5 day repose in the home of the family, where monks chant to release the soul from purgatory, and the family ceases activity to facilitate the soul's peaceful ascension into heaven. The corpse is then sent to the burial site high among the mountains, which is always far from the residential area. At the burial site, the corpse is laid facing the ground. The back and muscles are peeled off and the limbs are disjointed from the body. The bones are crushed and mixed with flour. After a signal is sent off, the ravenous vultures swoop down and peck at the flesh and the bones scattered around. Any remains left by these huge birds would tie the spirits to this life, so they must all be collected up. After they're cremated, the ashes are scattered into the air. At this time, the deceased completes the move on to nirvana. Buddhism has contributed significantly to the development of sky burial. Buddhism advocates that the soul is immortal and the body is only a carrier. It would be better to benefit other creatures rather than let the body rot. And since vultures are sacred birds in the eyes of Tibetans, it's their belief that only the majestic birds are competent for bringing the souls up to heaven.
The Torajanese people of central Sulawesi, Indonesia, have been long known to practice extravagant and unusual customs in celebrating their culture's funeral traditions. The Sulawesi island contains a great variety of exotic people, culture, and natural wonders, and the funeral rites of the Toraja are some of the most elaborate in the world. For Torajan, a funeral is the single most important ceremony in the life cycle. It is based on a strong belief that the soul of the deceased travels the land and into eternity just the way he is alive in this world. The funeral ceremonies are events for every member of society and are festivals lasting as long as 10 days with much entertainment and feasting. Until they can afford to have a proper funeral, this ceremony may take days, weeks, or months after the individual's actual death to be acknowledged. In Toraja, people aren't dead unless they have a funeral. Until then, they are just sleeping. And in the village of Lambo, one woman is actually known to have shared her bedroom with an embalmed husband for almost 2 years with no funeral in sight. Some of the funerals can be so lavish and expensive that families may go so deeply in debt that it can be carried through generations, so that children are often born owing money for the funeral of a person they never knew. What makes funerals so expensive is the large number of slaughtered animals in the following feast. Animal sacrifices are made to ensure eternal life in the afterlife and to safeguard the descendants. Buffaloes and pigs are sacrificed as an indication of status and as repayment for gifts received. The number of water buffalo slaughtered for the funeral feast is directly proportional to the wealth of the deceased family, and the horns of the buffalo slaughtered are stacked outside ceremonial houses as a reminder of the event. Funerals are not only an event for the family and the community, but also for tourists. There are various types of graves that are located in cliffside caves, mountain ledges, or in special houses for the dead. In Toraja, the graves are made in huge rocks because of their strength and relative safety from animals and thieves. Some graves are even guarded by life-size, handmade wind statues outside where the person is buried, and to tourists are considered eerie, haunted tombs.
We are now going to discuss the traditional funeral rites and practices of the Australian Aborigines. The Aborigines that exist in Australia today have been heavily influenced by Christianity. Although they have succumbed to the Western world, a majority of the modern-day Aborigines have retained their ancestral traditions. Aborigines do not regard any death as accidental and often use psychic practices to discover who was responsible. When someone in the community dies, everyone mourns. Even if the deceased is a murderer, the entire community will mourn the loss of a human life. If anyone has harmed the deceased throughout his or her life, they may subject themselves to measured wailing or even self-mutilation in order to expiate their guilt. This is done because otherwise the deceased spirit may haunt them for the rest of their lives. Other ways of warding off potentially angry spirit is by shooting guns, yelling, and screaming, and all in all just making loud noises in places that the spirit might visit. There are 2 stages for burial for the Aborigines. The first is the primary burial, which is when the corpse is laid out on an elevated wooden platform. The body is then covered in cloth for protection from the sun and for privacy. Leaves and branches are placed on and around the deceased's body as well, to help mask the smell of the rotting flesh and to ward off scavenging animals. The remains are left for several months and for the flesh to rot away from the bones. Next comes the secondary burial. After the flesh has rotted away from the bones, the members of the community collect the bones from the platform, paint them with red ochre, and then disperse them in different ways. One such way is the wearing of the bones. Sometimes a relative will carry a portion of the bones with them for a year or sometimes even more. This is a way of honoring their dead. The bones may be worn around their waists, head, or neck. Sometimes the bones are wrapped in paper bark and deposited in a cave shelter, where they are left to disintegrate with time. In some parts of Australia, the Aborigines' bones are placed in a large hollow log and are left at a designated area of bushland. The hollow log is a dead tree trunk which has been naturally hollowed out by the action of termites. Once the deceased has been respectfully buried, the mourning period of 1 year has lapsed. The survivors are no longer allowed to speak the name of the dead and are encouraged to continue about their normal lives.
The Scandinavian Vikings were active in Europe between the 9th and 11th centuries. They were active as raiders, traders, and settlers. There was a sense of pressure as well as ease knowing they could raid and settle a new town to call their homeland. Some famous Vikings include King Canute the Great, Eric the Red, a settler of Greenland, Leif Erikson, a settler of Vinland, and Sweyn Forkbeard, king of England and Denmark. The Vikings believed you need much of the same things for the afterlife as you do in this life. Therefore, the wealthy were buried at sea, taking with them the things they needed the most in this life. For the men, this included weapons and tools of the trade. For women, were buried with domestic equipment and their jewelry. Another important thing the Vikings would take with them into the afterlife was food. The food they would bring was said to be their last meal to get them to the afterlife. The Vikings ate fish, seafood, meat, bread, cheese, fruit, and vegetables in different amounts depending on availability as well as wealth. Not everyone was wealthy enough to be buried at sea. In cases like these, stones were placed in the outline of a ship, and that would help them get to the afterlife. But having an actual ship was the only definite way to get the deceased to the afterlife. If the deceased was a nobleman or a great warrior, his wife was passed along his tribe for men to rape her before strangling her and placing her in the ship with her late husband. Lucky for us, this is no longer practiced. The Vikings had many strange customs but were devout to their practices. They believed after they passed out of this life they would go to a similar world and live with the gods. This is why it was important for them to take all their important belongings with them when they were buried.